Is today a day I can eat? Yay! The room went cold with that one comment. My grandson, David, was always lively and energetic, but he started hesitating to play outside. He used to be a bit chubby, but now he's slimmed down. Seeing this, I realized something was off and was like, why don't you tell me what's going on? As a result, my son and his wife began to make excuses in a panic. But realizing my son and his wife didn't grasp the gravity of the situation, I decided to lay down the law. My name is Karen. I'll turn 55 this year. I married my husband when I was 23, and had my son at 25. Ever since, I've been a homemaker, taking care of household chores. My son, James, is now 30. He married Lisa when he was 25, and they were soon blessed with a child. So, I have a 5-year-old grandson. My grandson's name is David. David has always loved playing outside, and whenever he came to our house, he would always run around in our yard. Whenever my son and his wife visited me, either my husband or I would always take David to the park. People say kids will be kids, and that certainly applied to David. My son and his wife would often bring David over to visit, but one day, I noticed something was off about David. He used to be enthusiastically like, I want to go play outside. Take me to the park, but for some reason, he didn't want to go out that day. When I asked like, don't you want to go outside? It's nice out and it'll be fun, he was like, but showing little interest in going out. I thought maybe he wasn't feeling well and decided not to press further. Luckily, we had lots of board games and cards that could be played indoors. These were the toys that James used to play with when he was a kid, stored in our closet, so I quickly took them out. Although David seemed happy, there were times he'd just blankly stare outside. I thought he might still want to go out and asked him like, if you're not feeling up to playing, how about a short walk to the store? David then looked at Lisa. Lisa, with a resigned expression, was like, only for a bit. At that moment, David cheered and began running around my house. He clearly wanted to go outside. I thought being stuck in a house with just adults probably wasn't much fun for him. I was about to get ready and take David out when Lisa suddenly stopped me. Hold on a sec. In Lisa's hand was sunscreen, and she began applying it to the face and limbs of David standing next to her. I've heard that UV rays can cause skin cancer, and getting sunburned hurts. I was impressed with how diligent Lisa was in this regard. After that, we headed to a store nearby, but on the way, David kept insisting that he wanted to play in the park. I was like, just for a bit, letting David play in the park. It had rained earlier that day, and the ground was muddy. David got his foot stuck in the mud. In that moment, he fell face first, his clothes completely covered in mud. Even his face was smeared with mud. I asked David like, are you okay? Any injuries? But it seemed he wasn't hurt. However, his joyful expression from earlier had turned into one of despair. Reluctantly, I took the dejected David's hand and we headed home. Seeing the muddy David, Lisa was like, what's this? I told you not to play. Karen, please stop him next time, she exclaimed in a loud voice, scolding David. I was like, hey, kids will be kids. Things like this happen from time to time. I'll make sure to wash the clothes. I tried to calm her, but she was like, that's not the point. Thanks to James intervening and calming Lisa down, the situation was diffused. However, it seemed my son and his wife had many strict rules at home. For instance, when I tried to give David some candy we had at home, Lisa was like, we're trying not to give David candies. It spoils his dinner. I understood the concern about overeating from big bags, but they even refused small individually wrapped candies. Feeling bad for David but understanding that rules differ across households, I decided not to offer him any candies. Even after that, my son and his wife did visit, but their rules felt too strict. Whenever we ate out with my son, his wife, and David, they would always choose light meals at diners. Places like barbecue joints or steak restaurants, which kids typically like, were off limits. If that's their household rule, then it can't be helped. However, From my perspective, it seemed a bit too pitiful for the child. My husband and I would sometimes talk like, don't you think they're a bit too strict? We took James to various places when he was young, didn't we? While my husband usually didn't say much, it seemed he felt the same way watching my son, his wife, and grandson. But we concluded it wasn't our place to interfere and decided to respect my son and his wife's parenting decisions. From that time, my son and his wife stopped coming to our house. Apparently, James got busier with work and couldn't make time. They used to visit once a week, so it felt like a sudden change. While we always looked forward to seeing our grandson, our son and his wife, we couldn't help but feel a tad lonely. We continued to communicate via messages, so I often received photos of my grandson. One time, something caught my attention. He seems to look more mature. David is turning 5 this year, but comparing his recent photos to the older ones, he did seem to look more grown up. They say kids grow up fast, but seeing this made me feel like he'd be an adult in no time, and I felt a bit melancholic. About 6 months had passed since my son and his wife stopped visiting. They informed us they finally got some extended time off. The idea of a dinner gathering came up. Considering their preferences, my husband and I suggested a slightly upscale traditional American restaurant. Once we got the green light from my son and his wife about the restaurant choice, we quickly made a reservation. The thought of dining together after such a long time was thrilling. I was so excited that I barely slept the previous night. The next day, eager to see my son's family, I arrived 30 minutes earlier than planned. After a short wait, my son, his wife, and David arrived, and we were led to our reserved table. "It's been a while, how have you been?" "Well, work's been busy, and I couldn't visit you often. But I managed to get a 3-day off. We're sorry for not coming around much." We were making small talk when I noticed something. David looked slimmer than before. He used to be a slightly chubby and adorable kid, but now he's become a slim boy who could easily be described as handsome. David seems to have lost weight. Isn't he a bit too thin? Is he eating well? Maybe he's lost his appetite because of the summer heat? He's eating just fine. You know, kids this age, their body type can change in a flash. Finding clothes was a real challenge. I had expressed my concerns about David's weight, but I was reassured that he was eating properly. After chatting for a while, our meals arrived. Being a multi-course meal, there was a lot to eat, but it was also a feast for the eyes. As everyone admired the dishes in front of them and reacted with delight, David, who had been quiet until then, suddenly spoke up. "Is today a day I can eat? Yay!" At that moment, I could feel the atmosphere in the room change. A day he can eat? What did he mean? I racked my brain desperately. Suddenly recalling how David's appearance became more mature, how he'd slimmed down out of the blue, and how he'd stopped playing outside, I arrived at a conclusion. If my suspicion was correct, it would be a significant issue. I decided to bravely ask my son and his wife. "I've been wondering for a while now, are you making David eat properly?" James and Lisa avoided eye contact. My son was like, "Of course, we make sure he eats. He even eats any veggies and doesn't have any dislikes. Isn't that right?" And his wife was like, "Yes, he always finishes whatever I cook." I wonder why he suddenly said it's a day he can eat. Kids can be so mysterious. They seemingly dodging a topic they'd rather not discuss. I've had a vague feeling for a while now that my son and his wife weren't giving David enough food. Given that he used to be a bit chubby, I thought they might be managing his meals out of concern for him gaining more weight. But looking at David now, that just doesn't seem to be the case. Not only had he lost weight rapidly, but he also looked listless and pale. "David, I want to ask you something. Are you getting enough to eat?" He responded with a shocking revelation. Looking at the elaborate meal set in front, David was like, "Yeah, I do eat. But, you know, Mom and Dad only let me eat like once every 2 days. I once tried to sneak some snacks and got yelled at. Is today not a day I can eat?" After hearing from David, I turned to James and Lisa and was like, could you please explain what's going on? They started to spill the beans. Apparently, they wanted to get David into a talent agency. But apparently, since David used to be a bit on the chubbier side, they were advised by an agent that it might be better for him to lose a little weight. So, for the past 6 months, they'd been restricting his diet to get him to this point. They'd even prevented him from playing outside and ensured he wore sunscreen to maintain flawless skin. When I asked why they wanted to get him into a talent agency, they said that as they walked around downtown, he was asked once, leading them to hope that he might become a big name in the entertainment world. While they haven't signed him up with a talent agency yet, they plan to formally apply in the near future. But he's still 5 years. How is he gonna balance that? I find it hard to believe you have his best interests at heart when you're not even feeding him properly. I said, my husband nodding in agreement. The entertainment industry is a tough world. We want David to be able to shine there too. Cut the crap. Kids need to eat every day. Especially growing ones. You better start making him 3 meals a day right now. For the first time, I raised my voice at my son and his wife, making them flinch. James was like, if mom feels that strongly about it, we'll make sure he eats properly, seeming to be persuaded by my insistence. That day, David had a full meal set in front of him, just like the adults. He ate all without leaving anything. From then on, I made it a routine to call my son and his wife every day to ensure that David eats properly. They not only assured us that they were making him eat properly, but they also sent pictures and shared the day's menu with us. My husband and I felt reassured and carried on with our daily lives. About 3 months after our dining experience with my son, his wife and David, we had to travel to their area for some business. After finishing our business, we decided to visit our son's house right away, skipping lunch. Long time no see. Lunch will be ready soon. Please wait in the living room. Lisa ushered us to the living room, where we found James and David hanging out. David looked much healthier than before, with a fuller face suggesting he'd been eating properly. After some chit-chat, Lisa entered the living room with dishes of food. Everyone gathered around the table, but there was a separate dish with noticeably smaller portion of food. Before I could express my surprise, David took his seat in front of the small portion. Isn't that a bit too little? Lisa was like, it may seem so, but any more and he'd gain weight, as if there was nothing wrong. Frustrated and realizing they might not heed my words any further, I excused myself for a moment and called someone. The person mentioned it was available at the moment, so the person could come over right away. While we were enjoying the meal they had prepared for us, someone knocked at the front door. I wonder who that could be, we weren't expecting anyone. It's someone I called. I replied as I went to the door to welcome in my old acquaintance. Hello, I'm John, a nutritionist. John is a friend of mine, who works as a nutritionist specializing in child nutrition. He mainly educates children about nutrition and happens to live near my son's house. John was like, are you aware of how bad it is not to make David eat enough? Starting with those words, John explained the importance of children having proper meals and how nutrition helps build their bodies. After listening to John for about 2 hours, James and Lisa seemed quite impressed as they looked over the recipes he gave them. They were like, wow, I didn't know there were recipes like this. Having these recipes might make it easier to prepare meals, showing some understanding of the importance of nutrition. Still worried, I began bringing food to my son's house from time to time. Each visit reassured me that David was being fed properly, but they still seemed keen on getting him into the entertainment industry. Apparently, they recently applied to a talent agency, and James and Lisa were anxious about the outcome. After some time, they informed me that he had been accepted. While I was happy for them, I couldn't help but feel uneasy. Would they really prioritize David's well-being? Day by day, as they updated me about David's progress, I carried these thoughts. One day, after my husband left for work and I was doing my usual chores, someone visited me at home. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I thought it might be a salesperson and considered ignoring it. But the person kept knocking at the door. Thinking it might be an emergency, I opened the door, only to find David, crying. "David! What happened?" I was so taken aback by surprise, but I quickly brought David inside. I figured David's house was quite a distance from here. But my immediate concern was to calm David down. I gently rubbed his back and waited for him to stop crying. After a while, he seemed to settle down and began to explain why he had come here. David was like, "When grandma is around, they feed me properly, but when you're not, they hardly feed me at all. They even threw away a candy my friend gave me. I just can't take it anymore." I thought they had understood me, but it seems they hadn't. He was put into the talent agency, but he said he really didn't want to be there. He has lessons every day, but because he's made to dance without having eaten, he feels like collapsing all the time. When the instructor sees this, they tell him to take a break, but Lisa, watching from the side, tells him not to rest. Even at home, he's shown various shows. One day, Lisa was like, "We want to style you like this, maybe cut your hair a bit shorter. Also, you've been getting a tan lately, so no going outside." Then David was like, "But I have plans to meet my friends soon." However, Lisa was like, "Cancel it. If you're thinking about your future, you'd better do as I say. If you become a famous dancer, acting would be next. We'll consider more after a small success." He wasn't even allowed to go out with his friends. Realizing there was nothing more I could do on my own, I decided to contact Child Protective Services. Although hesitant because it involved my own son, I knew I couldn't stay silent any longer. With that in mind, I quickly dialed Child Protective Services. They wanted to grasp the situation as soon as possible and said they'd visit James and Lisa's home the next day. I let David stay at my house that night, informing his parents of the decision. James was like, "I'm concerned about David and will come over after work." But knowing the current state of David, I couldn't let my son and his wife meet. I steeled myself and responded like, "Please don't come. Even if you do, I won't let you in or let you see David. You both need to reflect on what you've done." The next day, I took David to the hospital for a thorough checkup, and the results were far worse than I had imagined. David was malnourished and seemed to be showing symptoms of asthma. His frequent near-fainting episodes appeared to be due to anemia, and he was immediately put on N4. Believing it unsafe for him to return, I decided to keep David with me, but my son and his wife vehemently objected. They exclaimed like, "He's our son. Isn't this basically kidnapping?" However, once the Child Protective Services arrived and spoke with them, they begrudgingly accepted that I'd take care of David. And later on, it was established in a meeting at my son's home that not providing meals doesn't constitute as physical punishment and they wouldn't be legally charged. However, due to the negative impact it has on a child, they were urged to change their attitude towards David. During the discussion, the child welfare representatives repeatedly advised against getting David into the entertainment industry, but the two of them, my son and his wife, were not convinced at all. Lisa argued like, "How would we know unless we try? Maybe it'll work out. Can you please not meddle in our family matters?" Watching their exchange, my husband and I realized that it'd be tough for James and Lisa to raise David happily. We considered adopting him. At first, they opposed, but when a lawyer got involved, they quickly changed their tune. Anticipating something like this, I had asked the lawyer, who's a friend of my husband's, to come over just in case. After adopting David, James and Lisa seemed to lose their spark. It seemed that making David a celebrity was their passion in life, and James apparently stopped going to work altogether. Lisa might have finally realized the importance of their son, expressing a desire to take David back, but it's too late now. I doubt I'll ever hand David back to them. Still, if they genuinely repented, I thought it might be good for them to see him from time to time. After all, for David, his biological parents are essential. Speaking of David, when he met his biological parents, his behavior seemed somewhat formal and distant. It's as if he recognizes them as the people who didn't take care of him, and it's unclear if he sees them as parents at all. He must have felt a significant amount of stress living in that household. If only I'd realized sooner. Such regrets whirl inside me. The adoption process had its challenges, but David officially became a part of our family. 1 month after the adoption. David is thriving. Sure, he eats more than other kids, but as long as he gets plenty of exercise, it shouldn't be an issue. He's a kid who loves playing outside, so when we give him a soccer ball or a bat, he usually joins the neighborhood kids. David has such a sociable personality. He quickly gets along with other kids. When he comes home muddy, he excitedly shares the events of his day. During the time he lived with my son and his wife, perhaps due to stress, he started speaking less and less. But now, hearing him share his stories brings me immense joy. David's gonna start elementary school soon, and with the way things are, I'm not worried at all. I'm certain he'll make lots of friends and come home covered in mud as usual. But one thing has been nagging at me. The concern was, did my husband and I make the right decision in adopting David? After all, when we became older, might there be comments or criticisms from those around us? I also wondered if David might be concerned about that very thing. So, I decided to ask David how he truly felt. I asked him did you want to live with your dad and mom? Are you happy now? He was instantly I'm super happy. My old home felt very gloomy, and I hated being there. But now I can play outside and eat delicious food, so it's much better than before. He was I did feel a little sad when I left my dad and mom, but I love Grandma and Grandpa too. Thanks for always being with me. Hearing David's words made me genuinely relieved that my actions back then weren't a mistake. And I decided that if I ever come across a child in need, I'd act without hesitation to help them.